Title: Your soulmate doesn't even want to see your face, because they are under a heavy voodoo spell, performed by none other than. There are moments in life when the silence from someone you love becomes the loudest thing you have ever heard. It fills every room you walk into, follows you through every quiet morning, and settles into the spaces between your thoughts, like a heavy fog that refuses to lift, no matter how many times you try to breathe through it. You find yourself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every glance, every small gesture, trying desperately to locate the exact moment when everything shifted. You scroll back through your memories, like someone searching through old photographs, looking for the image that explains the sudden distance, the unexplained coldness, the wall that seemed to appear overnight without warning or reason. Dear soul, you need to hear this, and I am asking you with the deepest sincerity to stay with me until the very end of these words, because what I have to share with you is not something that can be understood in fragments or half-read paragraphs. The truth that lives in these words requires your full presence, your willingness to sit with yourself in this moment, and your courage to look honestly at what is happening inside you, not just around you. So do not skip ahead, do not rush through this searching for a quick answer or a simple remedy. Let these words reach you the way water slowly fills a dry vessel, gently and completely. I know that the silence between you and your soulmate feels deafening right now. I know that it feels like something deeply unnatural has occurred, like the sun simply decided one morning not to rise, leaving the world in a cold and bewildering darkness. The connection you shared with this person was not something ordinary. It was not the kind of casual warmth you find with a coworker or a pleasant acquaintance. What you experienced with this person touched something in the deepest layers of your being, reached into parts of you that you had kept carefully protected, and made you feel seen and understood in ways that perhaps no one else ever had. That kind of connection is rare. It is precious, and when it goes quiet, when the person who once made you feel so thoroughly known suddenly turns away and refuses to even meet your eyes, the pain of that withdrawal is unlike anything else the human heart is capable of experiencing. You are not imagining the weight of this. You are not being overly dramatic or too sensitive or too attached. What you are feeling is real, and it deserves to be acknowledged with complete honesty and gentleness. The confusion that is swirling through your mind right now, the constant questioning, the desperate need to understand why this is happening, all of it is a completely natural response to experiencing a profound disruption in a bond that your heart had come to depend upon. When something that felt as real and as grounding as solid earth beneath your feet suddenly shifts and becomes unstable, the entire foundation of your emotional world trembles, and that trembling is what you are feeling right now in your chest, in your stomach, in the back of your throat. Every time you think about the distance that now separates you from someone who once felt closer to you than your own breath, your mind, because it loves you and is trying to protect you, has been working overtime to find a reason. The human mind cannot easily tolerate unexplained pain. It needs a story, a framework, a cause that it can point to and say, here, this is the thing that broke it, this is the source of the damage, this is where we need to focus our energy to repair what has been lost. And so your thoughts have been reaching in many directions, pulling at threads, following every possible trail of explanation. Maybe you have found yourself wondering, If someone from your partner's past has reappeared, some toxic ex who never truly let go of them, and who has quietly been working to undermine what you both built together. Maybe you have thought about the people in both your lives, who seemed just a little too interested in your relationship, who asked questions with a certain kind of edge, who smiled at your happiness in a way that never quite reached their eyes. Maybe, in the deepest and most desperate hours of your confusion, you have entertained thoughts that go beyond the visible world entirely, wondering if some kind of negative spiritual influence or invisible force has cast a shadow over what you shared, disrupting the harmony, and replacing it with this unbearable cold. And I want you to know that in reaching for these explanations, you are not crazy, you are not irrational, you are a human being in pain, and human beings in pain reach for anything that might bring them understanding. There is something almost merciful about the way the mind searches for external causes. When the heart is hurting, because it is far more comfortable to believe that the disruption came from outside, than to sit with the uncertainty of not knowing, or worse, to wonder if you somehow played a role in what has fallen apart. I understand the instinct, I honor it, and I am not here to make you feel foolish for any of the thoughts that have crossed your mind in these difficult hours and days. But I am writing to you from a place of pure peace and clarity, from a space beyond the noise of fear and confusion, and I want to offer you something more steady than an easy explanation. I want to help you find your footing again, not by giving you a simple story to hold on to, but by inviting you into a deeper understanding of what is actually happening, both within yourself and within the person you love. Because the truth, when we are willing to look at it honestly, is almost always more nuanced and more human than the dramatic narratives our frightened minds construct in the dark. So let us begin here, with the breath. If you have not already, I want you to take a moment right now, and draw a long slow breath into the deepest part of your lungs. Feel your ribcage expand. Feel your belly soften, and then release that breath, slowly, deliberately, letting go of some of the tension that has been living in your body. For however long this has been weighing on you, you may need to do this several times before you feel any real shift. That is perfectly fine. The anxiety that has been building in your chest did not arrive in a single moment, and it will not dissolve in a single breath. But each conscious exhale is an act of returning to yourself, a small but meaningful choice to come back to the present moment, instead of remaining lost in the labyrinth of past regrets and future fears. When relationships face sudden storms, when a deep and meaningful connection is disrupted by what feels like an unexplained withdrawal of energy and affection, the experience is disorienting in a way that few other human experiences can match. This is especially true when the connection in question has been one of genuine depth and spiritual resonance, the kind of relationship that does not simply occupy your time, but actually changes you, expands you, opens chambers within you that had previously remained closed. When that kind of relationship goes cold, when the person who was the source of that expansion suddenly closes themselves off and pulls away, it feels like more than a relational problem. It feels like an existential one. It feels like a part of the world itself has been withdrawn. And in the raw, vulnerable space of that feeling, the imagination tends to reach toward dramatic explanations. Toxics operating from the shadows, jealous rivals sending out invisible poison, curses, spells, dark spiritual interference. These frameworks are not random inventions. They emerge from something real within the human psyche, which is the ancient, bone-deep knowledge that love is powerful, that it attracts attention, and that not everyone who watches two people love each other wishes them well. There is a kind of spiritual truth embedded in these old stories and beliefs, even when the literal interpretation is not what is most helpful in navigating the situation at hand. The truth they point toward is this: love is a force of enormous magnitude, and anything of great magnitude naturally creates ripples, attracts complex energies, and sometimes draws the attention of people and dynamics that complicate, rather than support the connection. But here is what I need you to understand, and please receive this not as a dismissal of your pain, but as an invitation into greater clarity. The most powerful forces at work in your relationship right now are not invisible, external, or supernatural. They are deeply human. They live in the interior world of two people who both carry histories, who both have wounds that have not fully healed, who both have fears and defenses, and unconscious patterns that activate in unpredictable ways. When love becomes sufficiently real and sufficiently deep, understanding this does not make the situation easier to bear in the immediate sense, but it does give you something infinitely more useful than a mystical explanation. It gives you a map of actual human territory that can be navigated with actual human tools: patience, self-awareness, honest communication when the time is right, and the kind of inner steadiness that comes from truly knowing your own worth. Let us talk about what is most likely happening within your soulmate right now, because I think this understanding is something your heart genuinely needs in order to move through this with grace rather than desperation. When two people share a connection of real depth, when the bond between them touches the authentic core of who each person is, rather than remaining safely on the surface of personality and preference, something remarkable, and also something frightening tends to happen. The depth of the connection acts like a mirror. Each person begins to see themselves reflected in the other's eyes, and not just the parts of themselves they are proud of or comfortable with, but also the parts they have spent years or decades carefully avoiding. Old wounds become visible, deeply buried fears rise to the surface, patterns of behavior that once served as protection begin to feel constraining and inadequate, and all of this happens not because the love is wrong or harmful, but precisely because it is real, because it is deep enough to illuminate what the comfortable shallowness of lesser connections never reaches. For many people, this illumination is not immediately experienced as a gift, it is experienced as a threat. Not a conscious threat, not one they could easily articulate if you asked them directly, but a deep and instinctive feeling of danger, as though the vulnerability that genuine love requires is something that the wounded self cannot safely afford. People who carry significant emotional wounds from their past, whether those wounds came from early childhood experiences, from previous relationships where their trust was violated, or their love was used against them, or from any number of other sources, often develop internal protective systems that are sophisticated and deeply ingrained. These protective systems serve a real purpose. They were created to keep the person safe in environments where openness and vulnerability led to pain. But those same protective systems do not always know how to distinguish between a genuinely unsafe situation and one where the vulnerability being required is actually the pathway to healing and wholeness. What this means in practical terms is that your partner's withdrawal may have very little to do with you. in the way that your frightened mind is interpreting it. It may not be a reflection of their feelings for you having changed. It may not be a sign that they have found someone else, or that they have decided you are not enough. It may in fact be almost the opposite of all those things. The withdrawal may be happening precisely because the feelings are real, precisely because the connection is genuine and deep, and because somewhere in the less conscious layers of their inner world, that realness has triggered an alarm system that is now screaming at them to retreat, to create distance, to build a wall before the vulnerability becomes too great, and the potential for pain too devastating to risk. This is not a comfortable thing to sit with when you are on the receiving end of the distance. I want to be honest about that. Knowing that someone might be pulling away because the love is real does not automatically make the experience of the withdrawal hurt less. If anything, it can add a layer of tragic irony that makes the whole situation feel even more emotionally complex. But understanding this dynamic does two very important things. First, it frees you from the exhausting and ultimately pointless spiral of self-blame, from the constant interior interrogation of what you did wrong, what you said that pushed them away. What fundamental flaw in your character has driven them to this distance? And second, it points you toward the kind of response that is actually most likely to create the conditions for healing and reconnection, which is not chasing, not pursuing, not frantically trying to break through the wall, but rather something far more counterintuitive and far more powerful. The most powerful thing you can do right now, both for yourself and for the connection you value so deeply, is to turn your primary attention back toward your own interior life and your own well-being. I know that this feels backward, when everything in you wants to focus outward on them, on understanding them, on reaching them, on doing whatever it takes to restore what has been disrupted. The pull toward external action is enormous when we are in the grip of this kind of relational pain. But the external focus, when it comes from a place of anxiety and desperation, rather than genuine love and clarity, almost always makes things worse, rather than better. It sends an energetic signal of neediness and fear that tends to cause someone who is already in a protective withdrawal to retreat further, rather than open up. And more importantly, it pulls you out of the only place where you actually have real power and agency, which is your own inner world. Your peace of mind matters right now, not as a strategy or a technique for winning your partner back. Though there is a kind of grace that naturally emanates from a person who is genuinely grounded and centered in themselves, and that grace does tend to be deeply attractive to others. Your peace of mind matters right now, because you are a person of worth and substance, who deserves to inhabit their own life fully, even in the middle of relational uncertainty and pain. You deserve to sleep at night. You deserve to feel moments of genuine joy and beauty, even while carrying the grief of this disconnection. You deserve to return to the fullness of who you are, rather than spending your days contracted around the absence of someone else's warmth. This is not about abandoning the love you feel. It is not about pretending that the connection does not matter, or that the pain of the distance is not real. It is about refusing to allow someone else's current unavailability to become the defining fact of your existence. It is about remembering, even when it is difficult, that you existed as a whole and worthy person before this connection entered your life, and that you remain a whole and worthy person, even in the middle of its current turbulence. The love you feel is real. The connection is real. And none of that realness is diminished or invalidated by the fact that it is currently going through a period of difficulty. Let us also talk about the fears that may be driving some of what your partner is experiencing, because understanding the landscape of fear is one of the most compassionate things we can do for someone we love. Fear, particularly the deep and old fears that live in the emotional and psychological body, is extraordinarily powerful. It can override conscious intention. It can make someone who genuinely loves you behave in ways that look and feel like rejection or abandonment, even when rejection and abandonment are the furthest things from what they consciously intend. Fear of not being enough, fear of loving too much and being left, fear of losing control of one's own emotional world, fear of repeating old patterns of hurt. These are some of the most common invisible drivers of the kind of withdrawal behavior that is causing you so much pain right now. When someone carries a deep fear of inadequacy, for example, one of the most counterintuitive responses to genuine love and connection is to pull away from it. Because if you allow yourself to be fully seen and fully loved, and then the love ends, the pain of that ending is calibrated to the depth of the love itself. The deeper you let someone in, the more devastatingly their eventual departure, real or imagined, can destroy you. And so the protective psyche, operating from its own wounded logic, sometimes decides that it is safer to create the distance yourself, to be the one who withdraws before you can be withdrawn from, to initiate the ending before it can be inflicted upon you. This is not a rational or conscious decision in most cases. It is an emotional and psychological reflex, rooted in experiences of loss or abandonment, that may go all the way back to the earliest years of life. If this is part of what is driving your soulmate's behavior right now, then the most important thing to understand is that their withdrawal is a story about them, not a verdict about you. It is not a judgment of your worth or your lovability. It is a reflection of their own internal struggle with vulnerability, with fear, with the parts of themselves that have not yet healed from old wounds. And while that understanding does not make your experience of the withdrawal painless, it does allow you to hold the situation with a kind of compassion that is very different from the anguished confusion of not understanding what is happening. Compassion is not the same as acceptance of mistreatment. I want to be clear about that, because there is an important distinction to hold here. Understanding that someone's hurtful behavior comes from their own wounds and fears does not mean that you are required to absorb that behavior without limit, or to wait indefinitely for someone to work through their internal obstacles. Compassion for another person's struggle must always be balanced with honesty about your own needs and your own limits. You are allowed to need reciprocity. You are allowed to need communication and presence, and the basic dignities of a real and functioning relationship. Understanding where someone's behavior comes from does not obligate you to accept behavior that consistently diminishes your own well-being. But, in this moment, before you have reached any decisions or conclusions, before you know whether this is a temporary withdrawal or a more permanent shift, the practice that will serve you best is one of compassionate witnessing. Witnessing yourself and your own pain with kindness and patience. Witnessing your partner and their struggle with empathy, rather than judgment. And witnessing the situation itself, with as much clarity and honesty as you can muster. Seeing it as it actually is, rather than through the distorting lens of either desperate hope or fearful despair. There is something I want to address directly. because I know it is living in some corner of your mind, even if you have not given it full conscious attention. The question of whether you should reach out, whether you should say something, do something, take some kind of action that might break through the wall and restore the connection, is one of the most agonizing ones you face in a situation like this. And the honest answer is that there is no single right response that applies to every situation. What is right depends on the specific nature of your relationship, the patterns that have characterized it, the communication history between you and your partner, and a number of other factors that are unique to your particular circumstances. What I can tell you with confidence is that action taken from a place of anxiety, desperation, or fear almost never produces the outcome we are hoping for in relational situations. When we reach out to someone who has withdrawn, because we cannot tolerate the silence, because the not knowing is more than we can bear, because we need reassurance that we have not been abandoned, we are usually operating from a dysregulated emotional state, and that dysregulation tends to come through in the energy of our communication. Even when our words are carefully chosen, the other person, who may already be in their own withdrawn and protected state, often responds to that anxious energy by pulling further away, rather than opening up. This does not mean you should never reach out. It does not mean that silence is always the appropriate response to distance. What it means is that if and when you do reach out, you want to be doing so from the most grounded and centered version of yourself that you can access, from a place of genuine care, rather than desperate need, from a place of offering, rather than grasping, from a place that communicates that you see them in their struggle, and that you are not going anywhere, not because you cannot function without them, but because you genuinely value the connection, and you are willing to be patient with the process. And before you can reach out from that place, you need to do the work of getting yourself there, which brings us back to the essential practice of this particular moment, which is caring for yourself, genuinely, actively, and without apology. What does caring for yourself look like in the middle of this kind of pain? It looks different for different people, and you are the one who knows yourself best at. But let me offer some threads that might be worth following. It looks like allowing yourself to grieve without getting lost in the grief, giving yourself permission to feel the sadness and the longing and the confusion, without making those feelings your permanent address. It looks like maintaining the basic rhythms of your physical life, eating with some semblance of nourishment, sleeping even when sleep is difficult, moving your body, being in nature, doing the things that keep your physical being functioning. It looks like reaching toward the people in your life who love you and who can offer you presence and connection in the absence of your partner's presence. It looks like returning to the activities and practices that fill you up and remind you of who you are, beyond the role of someone's partner or someone's beloved. It looks like prayer or meditation or whatever spiritual practice connects you to something larger than the current crisis. It looks like honesty with yourself about what you are feeling and why, without the self-judgment that turns that honest examination into another source of suffering. And perhaps most importantly, it looks like working actively to release the heavy, contracted energy of desperate searching, the energy of someone who is frantically scanning the horizon for an answer, who is in the grip of anxiety and fear, is an energy that actually closes off the very channels through which resolution and reconnection tend to arrive. There is a paradox at work here that is difficult to accept when you are in the middle of the pain, but it is one that is consistently borne out by the experience of countless people who have navigated situations like yours. The more you can release the desperate need for a particular outcome, the more you can genuinely rest in the uncertainty, rather than fighting it, the more space you create for something real and true to emerge. This is not about pretending that you do not care about the outcome. Of course you care, the love is real, and the hope for reconnection is real, and the desire for this to resolve in a way that honors what you have shared is completely legitimate. But there is a difference between caring about an outcome and white-knuckling it, between holding a hope and strangling it, between staying open to a possibility and demanding that the universe deliver it on your timeline. The first in each of those pairs comes from a place of love and trust. The second comes from a place of fear, and fear, for all its natural human legitimacy, is not a productive building material for anything you actually want to create in your life. I want to speak to you for a moment about the question of worth, because I think it is one that is quietly, but powerfully, at the center of everything you are experiencing right now. When someone we love withdraws from us, particularly when the withdrawal is unexplained and abrupt, one of the first things the wounded heart begins to question is its own value. Am I not enough? Did I do something that made them realize I was not who they thought I was? Is there something fundamentally unlovable in me that they have finally seen and can no longer bear to be near? These are the questions that whisper in the dark, when the silence stretches long, and the distance shows no sign of closing, and these questions are liars. I want you to hear that as clearly as I can possibly say it. These questions are liars, not because they arise naturally from a place of pain, which they do, and not because they reflect something about the intensity and honesty of your love, which they also do in their own tortured way, but because they operate on a fundamentally false premise, the premise that your worth is something that exists in relationship to another person's current assessment of you. As though your value as a human being is a variable that can be altered by someone else's emotional state, their fears, their wounds, or their temporary inability to show up fully in the connection. Your worth is not determined by whether someone else can see it in this moment. Your worth is not on trial in this situation. It is not something that needs to be proven, or defended, or earned back through some perfect combination of actions and words. It is intrinsic to you. It is woven into the fabric of your existence in a way that no one's withdrawal, no matter how painful, can actually touch. And one of the most important things you can do in this period of uncertainty is to work actively on returning to that knowledge. Not as an affirmation you repeat mechanically to yourself, but as a lived and felt truth that you access through the quality of your self-care, the honesty of your self-awareness, and the steadiness of your continued engagement with your own life. When you know your worth at a cellular level, when you have genuinely inhabited the truth of your own value, rather than simply spoken words about it, something shifts in the quality of your presence. You move differently through your days. You relate to the uncertainty of the situation differently. And crucially, when and if reconnection with your partner becomes possible, you approach it from a very different place than the one you would approach it from if you had spent this period marinating in self-doubt and desperate searching. You approach it as someone who has been growing and strengthening while the connection was in its difficulty. Someone who brings more rather than less to the table, someone whose love is offered from fullness, rather than from scarcity. There is also something important to be said about time, about the particular mercy that time offers in situations of relational complexity and emotional crisis. When we are in the middle of acute pain, time can feel like an enemy, each slow day stretching out impossibly long, each night bringing its own particular flavor of anguish. The urge to resolve things quickly, to force a conclusion, to end the uncertainty one way or another, even if the ending is painful, is completely understandable. Uncertainty is genuinely difficult for human beings to tolerate, and the uncertainty of not knowing where you stand with someone you love is among the most difficult varieties of that already difficult experience. But time, when we allow it to work, rather than fighting it at every turn, has a way of clarifying what nothing else can clarify. It allows feelings that were obscured by reactivity and fear to settle into something more legible. It allows people who are in the grip of their own internal storms to move through them at their own pace, emerging into a clarity that no amount of external pressure could have produced. It allows you to learn things about yourself that you cannot learn in the middle of a crisis. Things about what you genuinely need, what you will and will not accept, what your own patterns of response are when you feel threatened or uncertain, and how you want to choose to show up in your relationships, even when showing up is hard. This period of silence and distance, as agonizing as it feels, is also a period of information. If you can resist the urge to fill every uncomfortable moment with frantic action or searching, if you can allow yourself to simply be present with what is, you will find that the silence has things to tell you. About your own emotional patterns, about the specific nature of your connection with this person, about what you truly want from love, and what you are genuinely willing to do to cultivate it. About the places within yourself, where your own fears and wounds may be contributing to the dynamics at play, in ways that are perhaps less comfortable to acknowledge, but ultimately more empowering to understand. Because here is the truth about soulmate connections, about the rare and precious bonds that touch the deepest levels of who we are. They are not exempt from the ordinary difficulties of human relating. In fact, they often encompass more of those difficulties rather than less. Because the depth of the connection means that there is more at stake for both people, more that can be illuminated, and therefore also more that can feel threatening. The presence of difficulty does not mean the connection is not real, or not worth fighting for. It means that the connection is real enough to require both people to do actual work, to grow, to stretch beyond their comfortable familiar ways of being, to face the parts of themselves they would rather leave in the dark. Real love is not the absence of difficulty. It is the willingness to move through difficulty together, or even separately, but in service of the same ultimate movement toward each other and toward wholeness. And right now, while your partner is moving through whatever internal terrain they are currently navigating, your job is to move through your own. Not to wait passively and miserably for them to emerge from theirs, but to actively engage with yours, to learn what this period is here to teach you, to allow the space of disconnection to deepen your understanding of yourself, and of what genuine, sustainable, mature love actually requires. True connections, the ones that are rooted in something real and enduring, have a remarkable quality of resilience. They are not easily destroyed by periods of distance or difficulty, even when those periods feel catastrophic from the inside. What they require is not perfect, uninterrupted harmony, but the honest and courageous willingness of both people to keep choosing each other, keep doing their own work, and keep showing up to the truth of who they are and what they want. If what you share with this person is truly the kind of connection you believe it to be, then it has that resilience in it. And if it does, then this period of difficulty is not its ending, it is one of its passages. Passages are not comfortable, they are not meant to be. A passage is by definition a moving through, which means being in the in-between space, the space after something has shifted, but before something new has fully emerged. That space is disorienting and often frightening. It asks more of us than the spaces on either side, because it requires us to keep moving, without the reassurance of seeing where we are going. But it is in passages that the most meaningful growth tends to occur, both individually and in relationship. It is in passages that we discover capacities in ourselves we did not know we had, learn truths about ourselves and each other that could not have been learned in the comfort of uninterrupted closeness. So breathe, dear one. Breathe and come back to yourself. Release the weight of trying to control what you cannot control. Release the desperate searching for answers that may not yet be available to you. Release the fear that you are powerless, because you are not. You have enormous power right now, but it is not the power of force or manipulation or persuasion. It is the power of presence, the power of your own grounded, centered, genuinely self-caring presence in your own life. The power of choosing, in each moment, to return to yourself rather than losing yourself in the labyrinth of someone else's current unavailability. You are safe, even in the middle of this pain, even in the middle of this confusion and uncertainty. You are safe. Your worth is intact, your capacity to love and be loved is intact, your life is full of possibility, including the possibility of this connection finding its way back to health and wholeness. But regardless of how this particular situation unfolds, you are a person of depth and substance and genuine beauty, and the quality of your life is not ultimately dependent on any one person's ability to see and honor that truth. Let the dust settle, let the anxiety quiet, let yourself rest in the knowing that you have done nothing wrong simply by loving deeply, and being hurt by distance. Let yourself be where you are without demanding that you immediately be somewhere else, and trust, with the deepest and most grounded part of your heart, that the path forward will become clear when you stop exhausting yourself, trying to see it through the fog of fear. True connections find their grounding when we stop chasing answers in the dark, and instead focus on bringing peace, clarity, and strength back into our own lives. The light you cultivate within yourself is the most powerful beacon that exists. And if this person is truly your soulmate, truly someone whose connection with you is rooted in something genuine and enduring, that light will reach them. Not because of any mystical mechanism, but because real love is drawn to real presence, and the truest presence you can offer anyone is the presence of a person who knows themselves, values themselves, and chooses to live fully even in the middle of difficulty. You are not powerless, you are not broken, you are not abandoned by the universe, simply because one person is currently unable to show up in the way you need them to. You are a soul of genuine depth and remarkable capacity, and this moment, as painful as it is part of your story, not the end of it. Carry yourself with the dignity that your own worth demands, hold the love in your heart without strangling it with fear, and walk forward, one grounded and intentional step at a time, into whatever is waiting for you on the other side of this difficult and necessary passage.